Today we will learn and reflect on the Socratic Dialogues by Xenophon and Plato, on the Symposium or dinner party, although drinking party is a more accurate translation. These two symposium have two different guest lists, and in the first video we listen to the speeches by the guests. Many of these speeches dwell on love that we show to our lovers and friends and family members. These speeches, though flawed, prepare us for Socrates' speech on divine love, which will be in the next video. These Socratic Dialogues were written shortly after the overthrow of the 30 Tyrants and shortly after the trial and execution of Socrates. The 30 Tyrants were put into office by Sparta after she won the Peloponnesian Wars. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in our PowerPoint scripts posted to SlideShare. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. One of Plato's most notable Socratic dialogues was his symposium or dinner party. And in the Platonic Symposium, the aristocratic dinner guests are still hung over from the symposium from the prior night. So they decide on a quiet evening without flute girls and entertainment. A symposium that's more of a wine-sipping party where the guests offer light-hearted speeches on the aspects of love, concluding with a deep philosophical speech by Socrates on the divine love that subsumes and transcends romantic or carnal love. We will first reflect on Xenophon Symposium. Most scholars agree that Xenophon read Plato's Symposium, but although he doesn't dispute Plato's account, he wants to add his own perspective. Xenophon Symposium also has Socrates as the star guest who delivers a concluding speech. His symposium differs in that the flute girls and entertainers make his dinner party more entertaining. Apart from Socrates, each symposium has its own guest list, and the guests in Xenophon Symposium tell us what beneficial thing they are most expert in. When reading these dialogues, keep in mind that the speeches by the guests preceding Socrates are either simplistic or flawed or both, and they often describe sensual love, which can be partially noble, which are contrasted to the purely noble and divine love described by Socrates. These are two very different dinner parties, one featuring the Platonic Socrates and the other featuring Xenophon's more Stoic Socrates. Although you could argue that in some ways the Platonic Symposium is more Stoic than many scholars let on. Although by the time of the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the Platonists and Stoics were differing schools of philosophy in Athens, we prefer to argue that moral philosophy was core to both Xenophon's Socrates and Plato's Socrates. And you can read this list of speakers in Xenophon Symposium in our PowerPoint script uploaded to SlideShare. The guests to Xenophon's Symposium include Socrates, Antisthenes, who is the founder of the Cynic school of philosophy, one of the 30 Tyrants, plus several guests whom the 30 Tyrants executed. The host of the symposium, Callias, has a bit of a crush on Autolycus, although this is subdued in the story. He never addresses him directly in the dialogue. The young teen Autolycus sits next to his father Lycon, and later in the dialogue, Lycon says he is most proud of his son, and his son, Autolycus, his father. Later, Autolycus would be killed by the 30 Tyrants. Now, one of Socrates' prosecutors was named Lycon. Scholars are not sure if this is the same Lycon. And Xenophon says this: the modesty of Autolycus was regal. His good looks drew everyone's attention. There was not a man there whose feelings were not moved at the sight of him, and some became more silent. And Xenophon comments that those who are inspired by a discreet love wear a kindlier expression, speak in a gentler tone, and behave in a manner befitting a free man. This just sounds creepy to many modern ears, but there's no doubt that homosexuality was more accepted in the ancient world. Quite often an older man would pursue a teenager, often with permission of the boy's father, or so the sources say, and he would be a mentor to the youngster. And some of the relationships became lifelong friendships after the younger party matured. Now, our window to the past is incomplete. There were no public opinion polls of the ancient world. There are three things we can be certain of. 1. Many modern scholars who specialize in the study of ancient sexuality are they themselves homosexual, and thus seek to convince us that homosexuality was condoned by nearly everyone in the ancient world. Second, we know that in the ancient world, just as today, attitudes towards homosexuality varied from place to place, and person to person, and time to time. And third, As the centuries progressed, the ancients became more and more uncomfortable with pederasty, and that's the men-boy type relationships, as they are so prone to abuse. And the Christian antipathy to homosexuality testifies to this progressing intolerance to pederasty. Not only do these two dialogues on the symposium try to discover the truly divine love, but they also seek to discourage predatory homosexual relationships. And Socrates is above the venial and vulgar types of love such as this, never consummating any homosexual relationship. Indeed, in this part of the dialogue, Socrates said that no man surely daubs himself with scent for the benefit of another man. I mean, who would do that? We read more philosophy to learn how to lead a godly life, and since these dialogues were part of the historical movement that eventually rejected pederasty, we can easily apply these observations to romantic relationships between men and women, seeking the lasting Platonic divine love that will outlast the fading sensual romantic love. Going back to Xenophon Symposium, hosts of racier Greek drinking parties would provide flute girls and courtesans for their drunken guests. But our host Callias, likely knowing that Socrates would not approve of this, instead invited a Syracusan who provided tamer entertainment with flute girls and acrobats. During dinner, Socrates is asked why he doesn't train his difficult wife, Xanthippe, to be less problematic. Socrates responds in a manner a Stoic would appreciate. When men want to become good horsemen, they avoid the docile horses, because if they can manage high-spirited horses, they can easily manage any horse. Therefore, if I can put up with my difficult wife, I shall find it easy to get on with anybody else. Now, we hope that his wife Xanthippe never discovered that her husband Socrates compared her to a spirited horse, which perhaps suggests there were limits to the wisdom of Socrates. Or maybe that is why she is pouring water on his head in several of her paintings. After dinner, the speeches begin with the host sharing his most valuable area of expertise. Callias starts with, "Let me tell you what I am most proud of. I believe that I can make people better." Antisthenes, the Cynic philosopher, asks him, by teaching them some manual skill or true goodness? And Callias, true goodness, if that means morality. Next is the turn of Antisthenes. He declares that he is most proud of his wealth, although he admits he doesn't even own an obol. He is penniless. As Cynic philosophers live as paupers, sleeping in the city square. In one of our earlier videos, we reflected on the philosophy of Antisthenes, the founder of the Cynic school of philosophy. The most famous Cynic is Diogenes of Sinope, who lived in a large pod in the city square. And the Cynics accentuated the asceticism of Socrates' philosophy. These are some of the sayings of Antisthenes from the work by Diogenes of Laertius. "Pay attention to your enemies, for they are the first to notice your faults." When asked what advantage he enjoyed from philosophy, he said, "To be able to live in company with oneself." When asked what is man's greatest blessing, he replied, "To die happy." And virtue is all that is needed for happiness, since it needs nothing but the strength of Socrates. Virtue is a matter of deeds, and deeds need no abundance of words or learning. Later, Zeno and the Greek Stoics adopted much of the Cynic attitudes and teachings, though they preferred to live in simple huts rather than in large pots. Then Charmides then playfully responds that he is most proud of his poverty. Later in the dialogue, we learn he lost his considerable wealth during the depredations of the war. Charmides was one of the 30 tyrants who later executed his fellow guests, possibly for their wealth, Niceratus and Autolycus, and Charmides later died in the battle with those who opposed the tyranny. Niceratus, a prominent general, says that he is most proud that he can recite the whole of the Iliad and the Odyssey, a valuable skill as many Greeks' works quote Homer. And that is why we reflected on the histories of the Trojan Wars and the Greco-Persian Wars, where the Greeks defeated the mighty invading Persian Empire, and then the long and complicated history of the Peloponnesian Wars, as this history will better enable you to understand the Platonic Dialogues. When Critobulus says that he is most proud of his good looks, Socrates asks him, "Can you claim that you make us better by your good looks?" And he answers, having successfully baited Socrates, "If I can, I obviously shan't look very good." So for the next round, Socrates then suggests that each guest demonstrates the value of what he claims to possess. When the host suggests that he can make people morally better, Socrates asks him how. Callias replies, by giving them money. Antisthenes then asks him critically, do people keep morality in their minds or in their pockets? And Callias explains how this improves people. When they can buy what they need, they don't need to risk committing crimes. Now, this is true in both the modern and ancient worlds. Those who are trapped in poverty are tempted to steal to survive. But this likely also reflects how some aristocrats sought to purchase some goodwill from their followers, or from poorer citizens to keep them from revolting against the wealthier classes. Socrates then asks Antisthenes why he prides himself on his wealth, although he has such limited means. Antisthenes responds, "Many wealthy consider themselves so poor that they submit to any hardship to increase their possessions. And some despots are so hungry for wealth that they commit far more dreadful crimes than the desperately poor. It is need, no doubt, that drives the poor to steal, break into houses, and kidnap. But there are some despots who destroy whole houses, commit mass murders, and often sell whole populations away into slavery for the sake of money." And this diatribe hits home, since the wanton executions by the 30 Tyrants installed by Athens by the victorious Spartan leader Lysander were recent memories. And the many victims included the rich and the poor, and some were executed for their political opposition, but many of the rich were executed solely for their property. Antisthenes observes further, those who are more concerned with thrift than extravagance are likely to be far more moral in their conduct, because those who are most content with what they have are least attracted by other people's property. Then he says that he has that supreme luxury, spare time. So I can see what is worth seeing and hear what is worth hearing when I spend my days at leisure with Socrates. Now, this dinner party of Xenophon has been leading up to the concluding speech by Socrates, which is also a reflection by Xenophon on Socrates' speech that he gives in the Symposium by Plato, where Socrates and all of the guests speak about love. So we will first examine Plato's Symposium now. In Plato's Symposium, there are no flute girls, no entertainers, and all the speeches are about love. And you can read this list of speakers in Plato's Symposium in our PowerPoint script uploaded to SlideShare. The guests included Socrates, Aristophanes, the comic whose play The Clouds fatally damaged the reputation of Socrates, another one of the 30 Tyrants, plus several guests whom the 30 Tyrants executed. Phaedrus, the student of Socrates, who has his own dialogue, began the speeches on love by affirming that love is a mighty god, and wonderful among the gods and men, the eldest of the gods. There is not any greater blessing to a young man who is beginning life than a virtuous lover, or to the lover than a beloved youth. For the principle which ought to be the guide of men who would nobly live, the principle which neither kindred, nor honor, nor wealth, nor any other motive is able to implant so well as love. Of what am I speaking? The sense of honor and dishonor, without which neither states nor individuals can ever do any good or great work. Phaedrus continues, the courage which, as Homer says, the gods breathe into the soul of some heroes, love of his own nature infuses into the lover. Love will make men dare to die for their beloved. As greatly as the gods honor the virtue of love, still the return of love on the part of the beloved to the belover is more admired and valued and rewarded by them, for the lover is more divine because he is inspired by God. And he gives the example of the Iliad, where the goddess mother of Achilles told him he was doomed to die in battle but would live to old age if he returned home. But after his friend Patroclus was killed in battle by Hector, Achilles gave his life to revenge his friend and dared to die, not only in his defense, but after he was dead. And Phaedrus concludes, that is why I affirm that love is the giver of virtue in life and happiness after death. Two of the speakers, Phaedrus and Eryximachus, may have been indicted, as was Alcibiades, for profaning the Eleusinian mysteries before the Sicilian expedition. Pausanias, the next speaker, says that those who listen to Phaedrus may conclude that there is only one kind of love, whereas there are many kinds of loves, which, like many other human actions like drinking, singing, and talking among friends, can be either good or bad. When well done, they are good, and when wrongly done, they are evil. Not every love, but only love with a noble purpose, is noble and worthy of praise. The carnal, meaner love of the common Aphrodite, goddess of love, is only concerned with bodily pleasures. But the love which desires only to gain an end and never seeks a noble end is not concerned whether it is good or bad. But the noble love of the heavenly Aphrodite is not wanton in her love. Here Pausanias expresses the nobility of Platonic love, where those inspired by the heavenly Aphrodite love not boys, but intelligent beings whose reason is beginning to be developed, much about the time their beards begin to grow. Pausanias says that we should not deceive those whom we say we love, but be faithful to them, and he explicitly states that the love of young boys should be forbidden by law, because their future is uncertain. And the coarser sort of lovers ought to be restrained by force, as we restrain them from fixing their affections on women of free birth. Such behavior brings a reproach upon love. Then the physician Aristophanes speaks how love is the best medicine of all, how the best physician can separate fair love from foul or convert one into another. Wanton love getting the upper hand is very destructive and injurious. Love which is concerned with the good, which is perfected in company with temperance and justice, whether among gods or men, has the greatest power, and is the source of all our happiness and harmony. It makes us friends with the gods who are above us, and with one another. The comic Aristophanes has the most hilarious description of love. This is the same Aristophanes who earlier had written a biting criticism of Socrates, which deeply damaged his reputation. During his trial, Socrates felt compelled to defend him against the lies about Socrates that Aristophanes included in the play. Arguably, these lies and slanders in the play of the Clouds was a factor in the jury finding Socrates guilty of impiety and corrupting the youth of Athens and voting to execute him. And the slanders by Aristophanes included that Socrates was a self-serving sophist who taught for money. The truth was that Socrates taught for free, and you can safely speculate that this encouraged Plato to endlessly prove in his dialogues that Socrates was not a sophist and that the so-called sophist philosophy was itself corrupt. Another slander is that Socrates instructed his student how to mislead and manipulate their peers and avoid their debts. And the truth of the matter is that Socrates was a moral philosopher, instructing his students how to live a godly life and how to participate in the democracy as a good citizen. And another slander is that Socrates only cared about teaching useless knowledge about how far fleas jumped, out of which end gnats buzzed, and gazed and wondered about the nature of the moon. And the truth is that Socrates, in his later years, only cared about teaching moral philosophy. Aristophanes begins, "Mankind, judging by their neglect of love, has never understood the power of love. Of all the gods, he is the best friend of man, the helper and healer of ills that prevent the happiness of man." He then describes the just so story of how the gods altered the primeval man to modern man. To account for both heterosexual and homosexual love, he said that there was originally three sexes, all man, all woman, and the union of both. And Aristophanes explains that the primeval man was round, his back and sides forming a circle. He had 4 hands and 4 feet, one head with 2 faces looking opposite ways, set on a round neck and precisely alike. Comically, he could walk upright, backwards or forwards, or he could roll at a great pace, turning on his 4 hands and 4 feet like tumblers rolling along with their legs in the air. But then this primeval man attacked the gods, daring to scale heaven. So Zeus decided to humble this primeval man and cut each man in 2, and he asked Apollo to heal each half. So what are the origins of love in this oddball creation story? Aristophanes tells us, the 2 parts of man, each desiring his other half, come together and throw their arms about one another, entwined in mutual embrace, longing to grow into one. So now man is always looking for his other half. When one of them meets his other half, the actual half of himself, the pair are lost in an amazement of love and friendship and intimacy, and will not be out of each other's sight even for a moment. Now in Xenophon Symposium, the host spoke first, but in Plato's Symposium, the host Agathon speaks last before Socrates on the topic of love. Agathon says that the prior speakers, instead of praising the god love, or unfolding his nature, appear to have congratulated mankind on the benefits of love. He says that the god of love is fairest and the youngest of gods, fleeing old age, ever youthful, young and tender. The god of love walks in the hearts and souls of both gods and men, but not in every soul. Where there is hardness he departs, where there is softness he dwells. This is a Stoic god. His greatest glory is he can neither do wrong, nor suffer wrong to or from any god or man. Not only is love just, but he is exceedingly temperate, for temperance is the acknowledged ruler of pleasures and desires. And no pleasure ever masters love. He is their master, and they are his servants. And if he conquers them, he must be temperate indeed. Agathon continues, "Love empties men of disdain and fills them with affection. Love encourages courtesy and discourages rudeness, is always kind, never unkind. Love is the parent of delicacy, luxury, desire, fondness, softness, grace. Encourages the good, discourages the evil, in every word, work, wish, and fear. Is savior, pilot, comrade, and helper. Let every man follow in love's footsteps, sweetly singing in his honor and joining in that sweet strain with which love charms the souls of gods and men. Socrates then quizzes Agathon, as only Socrates can, on the nature of love. And then in his speech, Socrates tells us of the lessons on love that were taught to him by Diotima of Mantinea, a woman wise in this and many other kinds of knowledge. And this is a Socratic dialogue set within a Socratic dialogue, a dialogue on divine love. Now, just as Socrates finishes his speech, our drunken and rowdy friend Alcibiades crashes his party, is invited to give his own speech on love, which is really a speech comparing his carnal love for Socrates to Socrates' divine love for Alcibiades, and all his students, and indeed for all of Athens. And we finish with a reflection on the final speech of Socrates in Xenophon Symposium, and the speech of Socrates and Alcibiades' interruption is in our next video. Now we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. We enjoyed listening to the lecture by Professor Michael Segru of the Teaching Company, or Great Courses, but not on Wondrium, on the Symposium. He is enthusiastically Platonic, and by listening to his lectures you can understand how the Neoplatonists were able to elevate Platonism nearly to the status of a religion. Now he and I have different approaches. I prefer to draw out the moral lessons from all the positions, so I'm concentrating more on the content. But Professor Segru also argues how Plato in this dialogue is criticizing the shallowness of the philosophy of the sophistics, showing how the sophist Gorgias has influenced some speakers, and he draws out the symbolism in how the speeches are staged and how the speakers give their speeches. Since many of our videos on ancient Greece use many of the same sources, we have a video on book reviews of the ancient Greek history and philosophy. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.